a LitReactor article that I wrote a while back, and it came out on the 18th of November. And the article is called "How to Come Up with the Perfect Story Title." So we'll read through and I'll discuss stuff. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask as we go along. I'll put this into the chat so you can look up the link of the article itself if you were interested. All right. And so let's look at this article. How do you come up with the perfect story title? I wish I knew. LitReactor should have found someone who knew what they were doing to write this article. Richard Thomas recently wrote an article on multi-pronged story hooks that address titles. Definitely check that out. He's the kind of guy who knows what he's doing. I'm just winging it when it comes to titles and writing too. Maybe that's what picking a great title is all about. Searching the darkness for the right treasure, that the perfect words that may in fact not exist at all. But you have to call your story something. So let's see if we can figure this out together. All right. When I'm writing on stream, usually I start from the title. So I just come up with a story title, and that's kind of where everything jumps off from. I'll take a few notes from there, but most of the time I'm going from the title to the story, even if I have an idea of what the story is about. All right, short and sweet. This is one approach to picking your story title, and I'm going to confess some mistakes I made early in my career here. When I first started writing for money, I barely knew how to put a story together. I thought I was good. Some other people thought I was pretty good back then too. We were all wrong. Revisiting those early stories gives me headaches. I also had this thing where I liked to come up with one-word titles whenever I could. If that was a thing I was known for, that might be a cool signature of sorts. But no one knew me. One-word titles sometimes stood out, but looking back, I think they were often forgettable. As I started cataloging my stories in recent years, I often had to open up those one-word titled stories and read a bit to remember what they were about. If I couldn't remember them, how was anyone else supposed to? I did a shared collection with author T. Fox Dunham years ago that is now out of print. Looking at the table of contents is crazy because he was using longer titles that built mystery and interest, while my titles popped out between each of his like a sharp jab. See for yourself in this sample from the TOC. That's table of contents. Rip. Everyone has an Aunt Gladys. Guess. Dancing at Albie's pub at the end of the world. Hate. The white room under the pyramid where the faceless go. Messenger. The lion and the monkey man. Scene. Can you tell which titles are mine? The collection was called The Rip and the Rhythm, but there was no rhythm to that TOC. I'm not saying one-word titles are always a mistake. I'm saying that I left a lot of potential on the table by sticking with this naming protocol. I was being more cute than I was hooking the reader, catching their interest with the first part of the story they saw. So that's where I think my mistake was with those one-word titles, was in just giving something that wasn't entirely memorable to sort of build interest and mystery around the story. All right, the other option is kind of the opposite: long, clever, ironic. I don't do this all the time, writing a purposely long title, but it has potential to catch the reader's attention. It is essentially the opposite of my one-word phase. I wrote a story that started out with the title Bible Robot. It was a word combination that stuck in my head from a snippet of conversation. I added it to the running list of potential titles on my dry erase board. I'll talk more about that later. The story wasn't the greatest, but I felt the title, as unusual as it was, fell a little short. After finishing the story, I renamed it One True Holy Bible Robot and All His Files Sacred and Historic. The title may be grander than the story in this case, but I do feel this captures the tone and grabs potential readers' attention better. This year for NaNoWriMo, which I was successful in, and we will revisit everybody's tomorrow, I'm writing an over-the-top zombie novel titled Ruthless Rabid Raging, Ravenous Rampaging, Remorseless Repulsive Revolting Repugnant Zombies. Obviously the title is a gimmick. The whole story is a gimmick. I'm writing it as one 50,000 word long action scene. The title is more likely to gain attention than if I used just one of those words. I also wrote a story called Incident Report concerning the bizarro fiction reading hosted last Thursday at the New Bitterwood Primitive Baptist Church in Vicksburg, Mississippi, with Ethel, the former chair of the Women's Missions Committee. The title speaks for itself, I guess. These titles are hooks in the sense that they stand out because they are a bit ridiculous, and the length is part of that. It is a gimmick, though, and will grow old if every title I write leans into this style. And I do believe that. Another title I have coming up here in December for one of the writing stories is Magic House Flip S16E4 on the Home Food Crime and Ancient Curses Network. And so that's going to be kind of a gimmick story as well with a slightly longer title. From Everywhere. Is that the next thing? Yep. Another habit I had early in my career was I wrote short stories to market. I found the market, I considered the theme, I came up with an idea, and I wrote that story. And I usually gave it a one-word title. If I had to come up with a story from scratch with no anthology theme to bounce off of, I was kind of at a loss. When these written for specific themes stories were rejected, I subjected other editors to these mismatched tales over and over. Looking back on my writing career is giving me heartburn. Jumping forward to where I'm not the greatest of all time, but I'm much, much better in comparison to who I used to be. I hear more and more from people who are impressed by what I've created, either short stories or longer works. I'm proud of the improvement I've made. 10 or 20 years from now, if I'm still around and still in my right mind, I may look back on my current work with the same eye-rolling embarrassment. We can hope. We can only hope. Today, I do a lot of short story writing live on Twitch. I started with a title and invent the story around it as people watch. I write these stories from beginning to end in one sitting in front of an audience. I get ideas for titles everywhere, including books I read, conversations I've had or overheard, a typo that strikes me as interesting, catchphrases, and more. As I find things that stand out to me, I write them on a dry erase board in my office for later use. Sometimes I have a story idea attached to them already. Sometimes I come up with a story concept and look to the board for a title to go with it. Often the potential title inspires something, but it takes a little time to percolate into a story ready to be written. A title that piques interest is worth a lot. It can match the story closely or just close enough to draw the reader in. Some examples. I read the phrase hole in the basement of the universe somewhere and held on to it until I wrote a story about a guy that jumps back and forth in time within his own mind to different points in his life. I was talking about my faith and how it connected to my interest in horror. I ended up saying something like worshiping a god who bleeds. Someone said that would make a great title. I put it on the board. I ended up changing it into Your God Bleeds for a short title, and that was actually done here on stream. I wrote down the road crossed the chicken as I thought about switching around the words in the old joke. I wrote a story for it about a strange boy who raises the dead. It's been accepted for an anthology. I wrote Winter Digs the Grave as a phrase in a novel and noted it for a potential short story title. I wrote a bloody apocalyptic combat story for it that was published recently. I was playing 20 Questions with one of my sons, and when he was little, he went through the usual questions. I went through the usual questions. Is it alive? Was it ever alive? Turns out he had picked a dead animal as the thing for us to guess. I asked which dead animal. He said, I am all the dead animals. I used this for a story about a serial killer in captivity who is able to project into the minds of other killers and victims, experiencing both the killings and the deaths. These kinds of titles strike my interest before I put them on the board, and then they have a certain punch that makes people interested in the story before they know anything about it. All right. Beyond that, I talk about the profane. I talk about things to avoid, and then I conclude. I'm going to stop there and put the the article title in the chat here. And if you are interested in seeing the rest of that, you can jump on that on LitReactor and let me know what you think of it. Of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can go to the description and get the article from there. So if it's one that interests you, feel free to check it out.